And hi everybody, and welcome to Around the Ancient Eight. I'm Dan Loney. Thanks for joining us for our preview of the women's basketball slate of games coming up this weekend. Today joining us to discuss those contests is John Nolan, who is the Ivy League Digital Network correspondent for the Princeton Tigers. And John joins us from Princeton, New Jersey. John, thanks for a few minutes.
Dan, thanks for having me.
John, Princeton has dominated the Ivy League over the last 4 years, but this year's team has a little bit of a different style. What's really been the key to their success?
Well, that's exactly right, Dan. The Tigers have won the last 4 Ivy League women's basketball titles, only program to do that. So Princeton just graduated the Ivy Leagues and schools winningest senior class ever, namely with Naveen Rashid, the 4th all-time leading scorer in Princeton history. But head coach Courtney Banghart has said this isn't a rebuild year, rather it's a reload year. So only 2 key players from last year's team who had significant time are back: Kristen Helmstetter, a forward, and Blake Dietrich in the backcourt. Otherwise, you've seen the emergence of Princeton's sophomore class led by a swing player, Michelle Miller, down low, Alex Wheatley and Taylor Williams, another sophomore, and Amanda Bernstein, and a freshman, Vanessa Williams. They've all been key contributors. Really, Courtney Banghart's been pretty comfortable this year, going 1 to 12 deep if everyone's healthy. And if you look at the numbers at this point in the year for Princeton compared to years past, they're pretty similar. But one way that the Tigers are different is that there is more balance. A year ago, Rashid averaged about 17 points per game. No one else for the Tigers averaged more than 8 a contest. To this point, this year, Princeton has 4 players averaging more than 9 points a game, led by Blake Dietrich, who's top 5 in the conference and scoring around 16 a night.
Blake Dietrich, their leading scorer, has really stepped up to take that number 1 scorer's role. How has she done that?
Well, yeah, a year ago, Dietrich, as a sophomore, really had to take a back seat to the talented seniors above her. Only started in 6 games, averaged about 8 a contest. So she's doubled her production so far this season. And how has she done it? Well, you really have to highlight her three-point shooting. She leads the Ivy League with 45 made three-point field goals so far this season. She's actually 11th in the country in three-point shooting percentage, 44% from triple range. That's pretty much an absurd number for a guard to be shooting better than 50% from the field overall. When you come to a Princeton practice, it's pretty impressive to see. Even during water breaks, Dietrich still stays out on the court and hoists up threes. She's been a marvelous leader for Princeton this year, on court and off. And she's not a one-dimensional player, though. One of the better wins Princeton had during the non-conference portion of its schedule was a game here at Jadwin against Delaware. In that game, Blake said she didn't really feel too confident in her shot from outside that game, and said she drove, still wound up around her season average in points. She's been a great rebounder this year, too. Last time out for Princeton against Penn, she had her first career double-double, grabbed 10 boards in that one, and best of all, as the primary ball handler for this Princeton team this year, her turnover numbers are really low as well. In that double-double game at Penn, she had 0 turnovers. So Blake Dietrich has really been a tremendous player for the Tigers this year. Also, though, I would have to highlight Kristen Helmstetter, 2nd-team All-Ivy a year ago, and she is maybe the most versatile player in the conference. One of only 2 players, along with Penn's Alyssa Barron, who's top 11 in the Ivy League in points, rebounds, and assists.
John, this weekend is the first full slate of games in league play. What are you expecting to see out of these contests?
Well, I think the place to be here tonight, Friday night, would be here at Jadwin, where Harvard is coming to take on Princeton. This season, or going into the season, Princeton was the pick by the coaches and media to win the Ivy League again, but not in unanimous fashion. Harvard also receiving first-place votes. So far, Harvard right up there with Princeton as far as having one of the better non-conferences so far this year. The Crimson 2-0 in the Ivy League with a couple of victories against Dartmouth. Princeton 1-0 in its only Ivy League game at Penn. That was nearly 3 weeks ago, so one wild card in this game is the fact that Princeton had 2 weeks off for exams and then has had this week to kind of get back focused on the court. But Courtney Banghart has said that she likes this extended break because it gives Princeton a time to really work on itself, not worry too much about preparing for opponents. But with that said, you don't know if there's going to be rust, and it's not going to be easy going against Harvard. Princeton and Harvard pretty much 1-2 in almost every major statistical category so far this season. There's one thing to kind of look at in this matchup. If is a close game coming down the stretch. One of the only areas that Princeton hasn't excelled so far this year is at the free throw line. Harvard towards the top of the conference, 72% percentage at the line. Princeton only about 66%, but it should be a great one. Remember, during the Tigers' 4-year run here as the Ivy champs, they've only lost 2 games in the conference. One of them last year at Harvard in the most recent meeting. But Princeton hasn't lost in this building, Jadwin, since February 2009. That is really just hard to fathom. At that point, if you can believe it, Dan, Justin Bieber wasn't even famous yet. A lot more simpler times back then. But Friday night, Princeton-Harvard should be a good one. Other games this weekend, also on Friday night. Yale's the only other 2-0 team in the league so far. They took care of business, a couple of convincing wins so far in Ivy play for Yale against Brown so far. They go on the road to New York, Columbia, and Cornell this weekend. The Lions have been pretty game so far this season. And then another one to highlight Saturday. Harvard doesn't get any easier after Princeton goes on the road at Penn. The Quakers had arguably the best and most impressive non-conference portion of this season, winning 8 games in a row at one point. They've won a couple in a row recently against Temple and NJIT. So it'll be fun to see how teams respond. First time this year where everyone's playing Friday, Saturday, back-to-back, as the 14-game tournament really starts to get into its full swing.
John, thanks very much for your time. Appreciate you joining us here on Around the Ancient Eight.
Oh, Dan, anytime, and should be a good one this weekend.
And don't forget, we've got a full weekend's worth of games starting tonight. All 16 teams will be in action right here on the Ivy League Digital Network. And don't forget to check back on Monday and Tuesday for complete highlights from both the men's and the women's games. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dan Loney.